I was feeding my cattle that morning, coffee still warm in my hand, when I heard it, gravel grinding, engine roaring, and then that sharp crack that makes your stomach drop. I turned and saw my private property sign lying broken in the dirt like someone had taken a swing at my name. Dust hanging in the air behind a shiny white SUV with a big HOA logo on the door, and behind the wheel sat Melissa Hartley, self-crowned queen of Cedar Ridge Estates, rolling across my ranch road like it was a public street the county forgot to pave. She didn't slow down, just lifted her fingers in this smug little wave through tinted glass, the kind of gesture that doesn't say hi. It says, "You can't do a damn thing about me." That was the exact moment something in me shifted, deeper than anger, more like a crack in bedrock, because that dirt road she'd just chewed up wasn't just a strip of ground. It was 15 years of my life. I'd carved that lane out with an old grader and a stubborn back, kept it alive through storms and drought so the feed trucks, vets, and farriers could get down to the barn, patching ruts at sunrise, shoveling washed-out edges until my hands blistered. And for 15 years nobody touched it. Nobody but me and the people I invited, until Cedar Ridge Estates showed up over the creek like a bad idea in a glossy brochure. Overnight, the far ridge grew a forest of identical tan houses, all sharp angles and vinyl siding. They called it Cedar Ridge Estates even though you couldn't find a cedar within walking distance. But the name sold. People moved in with their HOA newsletters and sponsored yoga classes, and right at the center of it all, like a queen bee with a clipboard, was Melissa, running the Cedar Ridge HOA like her own personal kingdom. At first I ignored them, figured their world stopped at the property line, but then I started seeing tire tracks on my road, fresh, deep, cutting right through my lane from the direction of their back gate. The first time I shrugged it off, told myself some new resident probably took a wrong turn. Country roads all look the same when your GPS gives up. I even laughed about it. But the second day those tracks showed up in the same place. And the third day I caught sight of that same white SUV at exactly 7:30 a.m., barreling across my road like it was a freeway on-ramp, dust cloud chasing her toward the highway. Day after day it happened, same time, same car. Sometimes she slowed just enough to give me that fake friendly wave. Most days she didn't bother, music thumping loud enough to spook my cattle, engine screaming as she bounced through a working ranch like it was a shortcut through a parking lot. And I stood there with a bucket of feed, watching, feeling that mix of disbelief and insult you get when somebody steals from you while looking you in the eye. So I tried it the polite way. I put up a big, clear sign right on the curve where she cut through, private road. No trespassing, no fine print, no confusion, planted deep in the ground where even a blind driver couldn't miss it. The next morning her SUV still came, and the sign was gone. I found it later snapped in half and shoved behind my hay bales like a trophy, and that's when I knew. This wasn't ignorance. This was contempt. The next day I parked my truck sideways across the bend and waited. Sure enough, at 7:32 that white SUV appeared, dust plume behind it like a comet tail. She rolled her window down halfway, gave me a smile that looked rehearsed. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes, isn't it?" she chirped, using my name like we were old friends. "Is there a problem?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is my land. This road is private. You're trespassing." She tilted her head like I'd just told a joke she didn't quite get. "Oh, come on. We're all part of the same community out here. What's a little dirt between neighbors?" she said, that line burning itself into my brain. "This little dirt is my access for feed trucks, vets, emergency crews," I told her. "I've asked nicely, please stop using it." She flashed a bigger smile, the kind people use before they hit you with a contract. "Well, I'll see what the board says," she replied, spun the wheel, and kicked a spray of dust right across my boots as she drove past my truck. Over the next week, I started spotting more Cedar Ridge folks near my fence, clipboards in hand, pointing, measuring, whispering like suburban surveyors planning their own private land grab. Then one afternoon, I came home from the feed store and saw a folding table set up right at the head of my road, balloons tied to the fence, a banner that read "Community Access Vote." Moving forward together. There stood Melissa in a pastel blazer with 3 HOA board members beside her, sipping lattes and holding papers. "We're just finishing a neighborhood vote," she said when I pulled up, her tone sugary and firm. "The Cedar Ridge HOA has agreed it would be beneficial to integrate your road as a shared access. We're calling it a community easement." I laughed at first, thought she was kidding, but the clipboards, the signatures, the HOA letterhead in Comic Sans killed the joke fast. That night a letter showed up in my mailbox, no county seal, just the HOA logo and her signature with a little smiley face, informing me that my road was now incorporated into Cedar Ridge travel access and any resistance would be treated as noncompliance. I sat on my porch with that letter in one hand and a beer in the other, looking at my road glowing under the moon, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of an HOA SUV somewhere beyond the trees, and I understood. This wasn't about convenience. This was about control. People like Melissa don't see land as sweat and memory. They see it as lines on paper they can move with a vote and a fake smile. And somewhere between that letter and the last swallow of my beer, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to ask anymore. I was going to teach. That's when I picked up my phone and called Ethan Crow, my oldest friend and the only man within 50 miles who owned an old backhoe and had a wicked sense of humor. I just said, "Ethan, you ever feel like helping Karma dig a hole?" And he laughed, low and delighted. "Just say when and how deep." "Luke," he answered, and right there on that porch, under that quiet sky, the trench was born. 2 days after that HOA vote circus, the air felt too calm, like the stillness before a storm. I was mending fence near the creek when I heard voices drifting on the wind. I looked up, and there was another gathering right on my land. Folding chairs, coffee cups, their little HOA banner about shared access, and Melissa standing there with a megaphone like she was dedicating a new park instead of stealing a road. I told her again, simple and clear, that this was private property, and if she kept crossing that line, I'd be calling the sheriff. She smiled, told me I was blocking progress, and promised I'd regret not cooperating with the community. That night another laminated HOA letter showed up, color-coded this time, accusing me of creating a hazardous trench plan, even before I dug it, threatening fines, hinting at legal action, quoting ordinance numbers that didn't exist. I smoothed that paper out and put it in a folder, reminded myself, you keep every piece of crazy, and then I called Ethan again. By sunrise he was in my driveway, stepping out of his old Ford with a thermos and that dangerous grin. "All right," he said, slapping the side of the backhoe. "Where are we teaching manners today?" We walked the length of my road, feeling the grade, the dips, the curves, two ranchers planning a sculpture instead of revenge, until I pointed at a spot just past a blind bend where the hill sloped down. "She hits this stretch doing 30. I said, "She'll never see it coming." "How deep?" he asked. "Deep enough to scare, not to kill." I said, "I want a lesson, not a funeral." He nodded. "Got it, a character development trench." We spent the day cutting into the earth, the backhoe growling as it took scoop after scoop, Texas heat pressing down, dust hanging in the air. Every bucket of dirt that came up felt like I was retrieving a piece of my own dignity from under that HOA tire track. By dark we had a trench about 3 feet wide and nearly 4 feet deep stretched across that road. Then we laid old plywood over it, packed dirt on top, scattered loose dust and twigs until it looked like any other patch of rough country lane. We hid 2 trail cameras in the brush, lenses aimed right at the bend, then dragged a couple of lawn chairs behind a stack of hay bales near the barn. The next morning, I brewed the strongest coffee I had. Ethan showed up with donuts, and we sat like 2 fishermen waiting for the biggest catch of our lives. The sun climbed. The fields glowed golden. The cows grazed like nothing in the world could disturb them. Then, like a movie cue, we heard it, the distant rumble of an engine, muffled bass from a pop song, and the faint sound of a woman talking too loudly on Bluetooth about standing firm in your power. Melissa was on her way to yoga. The white SUV crested the hill, gleaming in the morning light, HOA logo shining, yoga mat on the passenger seat, iced coffee in the cup holder. She never touched the brake, just flew into that bend like she had every right in the world. The front tires rolled over the disguised trench. The plywood gave a long, groaning protest, and then, with a crack that echoed across the pasture, the whole front end dropped. The SUV nosedived into the trench, front bumper vanishing, rear tires lifting clean off the ground before slamming down again. A puff of airbag dust and dirt burst through the open window. Melissa's scream tore through the still air, high and offended, like the universe had insulted her personally. Ethan bit his fist to keep from howling. I had tears in my eyes from trying not to laugh. For a long second, she just sat there, seatbelt tight, covered in chalky dust, frozen like some statue dedicated to consequences. Then she shoved the door open, stumbled out in her pastel workout gear, slipping on damp dirt, yelling about sabotage, attempted murder, criminal traps on community roads. She grabbed her phone, called the sheriff, pacing and gesturing as if she were narrating a war crime. 15 minutes later, a county cruiser rolled up, and Sheriff Daniel Cole, a man who'd seen every shade of stupid this county could produce, climbed out and took in the scene. The trench, the stuck SUV, Melissa ranting, me and Ethan standing behind our hay bales pretending this was all new to us. "Morning, folks," he said, slow and tired. "Somebody want to explain what I'm looking at?" "That man built a death pit," Melissa shrieked, pointing at me. "This is a public road, and he dug a trap. He tried to kill me." I shook my head, kept my voice steady. "Sheriff, this is my ranch road, on my deed. I've been working a soil drainage project. She's been cutting through here every day after I told her to stop. I've got the map if you want to see it." He took the folded county plat I'd brought, studied the red boundary, and nodded. "This road's on Luke Hayes' property, ma'am, not the HOA's." "That's absurd," she snapped. "We're all part of the same community. Our board voted to open this as shared access. We have rights." "Your board can vote on a bake sale," he said. "It doesn't change county land records." He turned back to the trench, the SUV, then to me, and for a second there was the faintest flicker of a grin. "You gonna file trespass and damage, Luke?" "Yes, sir," I said, "and I've got footage." "Thought you might," he muttered. When the tow truck arrived, the driver took one look and groaned. "Lady, this thing's married to the earth. I'll need a crane." He tried anyway. The chain strained, the truck lurched, mud sprayed across Melissa's HOA windbreaker, and eventually he sighed and said he'd be back with more help, leaving her SUV stuck there like an exhibit titled Entitlement in Decline. That evening, Ethan and I watched the sun sink behind that trench, beer bottles sweating in our hands. The SUV still nose down, half buried. Melissa's still pacing and yelling into her phone, and beneath all the laughter, I felt something settle in my chest. Not petty satisfaction, something quieter, a sense that the land itself had pushed back. But people like Melissa don't stop at embarrassment. They reload with paper. The next day, a thick HOA envelope showed up accusing me of environmental violations, threatening daily fines, quoting fake statutes. Then Melissa's cousin Greg Hart, self-declared HOA legal consultant, showed up in a cheap suit with a stack of nonsense cease and desist orders. I handed them back and suggested he finish law school before playing attorney in my driveway. That night, staring at the trench under the moonlight, I realized humiliation wasn't going to be enough. If I wanted this to end for good, I needed more than a hole in the ground. I needed the law on my side in writing, something older and stronger than any HOA vote. So at dawn, I drove to the county clerk's office and asked for every deed, plat, and easement tied to my land and Cedar Ridge. And somewhere between dusty binders and stale coffee, I found it. An easement contract from 1979, signed by the original developers of Cedar Ridge Estates, explicitly stating they were required to build their own access road and were forbidden, in permanent legal language, from using any pre-existing agricultural roads. In one sentence, it erased every fantasy Melissa had about my road belonging to her community. I left that clerk's office with a copy of that old easement on my passenger seat like a golden ticket, drove straight home, showed it to Ethan, then took it to Rachel Monroe, a local land rights attorney whose reputation around here is simple. She doesn't lose when the dirt is on your side. She read the document, smiled slowly, and said, "They've been trespassing on a road they were banned from touching 40 years ago. This is going to be fun." Within days, she'd filed a civil suit against the Cedar Ridge HOA and Melissa personally for trespass, harassment, and property damage, along with a request for a permanent injunction. And when the court date came, half the town showed up for the show. In that courtroom, under buzzing lights and the stare of Judge Franklin Dorsey, I watched Melissa try to spin the story, calling my trench a booby trap, claiming my road was morally public, insisting her HOA could reinterpret access for the good of the community. Her cousin Greg stumbled through cross-examination, asking if I enjoyed digging holes. like that somehow proved evil intent. And the gallery actually laughed when Judge Dorsey asked him if owning a shovel now counted as probable cause. Then Rachel walked the judge through the easement from 79, the county maps, the photos of my smashed sign, the trail cam footage of Melissa's SUV dropping like a stone into the trench, and the stack of HOA letters threatening fake fines. I sat there under oath and told the story in one long, steady line. All the times I asked her to stop, all the warnings, all the petty power plays, and how the trench was dug on my land, clearly marked in my own notes as erosion and drainage work. By the time Rachel finished and the video paused on the frame of Melissa's car hanging in the trench, dust frozen in the air, airbag limp, the mood in that room had shifted. This wasn't a dangerous rancher on trial anymore. It was an HOA president who'd been caught running over boundaries on and off paper. Judge Dorsey took his time with the ruling, flipping through the easement and court filings. Then he looked over his glasses and said, "This court finds for the plaintiff, Luke Hayes, the Cedar Ridge HOA, and Ms. Melissa Hartley are liable for trespass, harassment, and damage to private property." He ordered them to pay for the repairs, pay my legal fees, and granted a permanent injunction forbidding the HOA, now or in the future, from using my road for any purpose. Then he added the part that made the whole room hold its breath. He formally rebuked Melissa for abusing her position and recommended to the HOA membership that she be removed from office within a week, under pressure from angry homeowners and their own insurance company. She was out, banned from ever holding a board role again, her little empire gone. The trench stayed. After the verdict, something changed in Cedar Ridge. The new HOA president, a quiet man named Leon Carver, knocked on my door one afternoon, hat in hand, and said, "Mr. Hayes, we're building the access road we should have built from the start, on land that's actually ours. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for all of it." I shook his hand, told him I appreciated it, and watched weeks later as construction crews paved a neat, straight road from their gate to the highway, far from my fence line, lined with fancy solar lights and a big sign that read Cedar Ridge Drive, private HOA access. They finally had their own road, and I finally had my peace. Meanwhile, the internet did what it does. Someone stitched together the trial footage with the trench video, added dramatic music, and titled it HOA Karen vs. The Rancher's Trench. Millions of people watched Melissa's SUV vanish, watched her scream at the sheriff, watched the judge shut her down. Strangers from states I've never visited sent me messages thanking me for standing up to what they called HOA insanity. Some even drove out just to take pictures of the trench. Someone marked it on a map as Hartley Hole. Another uploaded photos under the label Boundary Pond. As for the trench itself, the seasons got to it. Spring rains filled it with clear water, wildflowers sprouted along the rim. Ducks started landing there in the evenings, turning a symbol of revenge into a small, stubborn oasis. I put up a new metal sign at the head of my road that read, "Private property. Trespassers will be trenched," half joke, half warning, and everyone around here knows better than to test which half I mean. Most nights now are quiet. Me on the porch with my old hound at my feet. Ethan in the guest house out back, a couple of cold beers on the rail, the sun sliding down behind the ridge where that trench gleams in the last light. We still laugh about the way that SUV dropped, the look on Melissa's face when the laminated easement wouldn't crumple in her hand. But underneath the humor, there's something heavier, something I carry like a lesson etched in dirt. Because here's what all of this taught me, and what I want anyone watching or listening to really sit with. I didn't win because I dug a hole. I won because I refused to let someone redraw the lines of what's mine with arrogance and paper. I documented. I stayed calm. I went to the records. I used the law. And I held my ground even when it would have been easier to give in and share a little dirt for harmony. Melissa Hartley fell into a literal trench, sure, but she'd been digging it with every smug wave, every lie, every letter, every trespass, long before her tires ever touched that plywood. That hole was just the moment reality caught up with her. Now I look at that trench, and I don't just see revenge. I see a boundary made visible, a reminder that respect isn't optional, that community doesn't mean you own what's convenient, and that some lines aren't meant to be voted away. So let me ask you this, and I want you to answer honestly to yourself before you type it in the comments. If you had a Melissa in your life, an HOA bully, a boss, a neighbor, anyone who refused to hear the word no, Would you stand your ground, document, fight back the right way, even if it cost you time and trouble, or would you let them keep crossing that line because it's easier not to make waves? And when someone finally hits the bottom of the trench they've been digging with their own ego, do you call that cruelty or do you call that justice?